Well, free agency has passed through the busy period, and we're now at that sort of lull where you'll still have some signings, but it's going to take some time to get a lot of these veterans onto teams. The 49ers took care of some business during free agency, although it was fairly low-key. They signed defensive tackle Glenn Dorsey, linebacker Dan Skuta, kicker Phil Dawson, and safety Craig Dahl. Obviously, these are not the most exciting of moves, and at least people wondering how they're going to fill some of their holes. As we start moving towards the draft, I thought we'd kind of reassess personnel needs and really where the 49ers stand at this point. We'll focus on the defensive side right now just because on offense, you're talking about backup quarterback and tight end are the two primary needs. The 49ers are going to draft more than that probably, but we can kind of overlook that for now. We'll take a deeper look at that in the coming weeks. But on the defensive side, really if you look back at the playoffs, several needs arose. If you look at the Falcons game and the Super Bowl, it was not a pretty picture for the secondary at times. Against the Falcons, we saw Julio Jones have his way with the secondary in the first quarter. We saw him blow past Deshaun Goldson. The cornerback struggled with him, and he had a monster of a game. Matt Ryan finished the day with 396 passing yards. Then in the Super Bowl, the 49ers might have done everything they could to single-handedly give Joe Flacco his $100 million contract. He only threw for 287 yards, but there were times where it seemed like he'd run around, wide receivers would be running around, and eventually they'd just find an open spot, he would chuck it up, and the 49ers secondary just kept getting spun around. Chris Culliver had a horrible game. But I don't think that those performances reflect necessarily should not reflect on the 49ers secondary. Obviously, it wasn't a pretty performance in the Super Bowl, and really much of the postseason involved some poor performances in pass coverage. But I think part of that has to do more with some of the issues that we saw with Justin Smith and Aldon Smith. Justin Smith was dealing with a triceps tear. Aldon Smith was dealing with a torn labrum, as we've subsequently found out. And I think the lack of depth on the line, the lack of depth at outside linebacker really are the primary issues on defense as far as depth is concerned. Obviously, the 49ers signed Glenn Dorsey. They have him working with Ian Williams, competing for that nose tackle role. But I have a feeling that Dorsey's going to end up in sort of a Ricky Jean-Francois role, where you kind of move him all along the line. Nose tackle, defensive end. Just kind of a utility guy that can do a little bit of everything. The upcoming 49ers draft will be an interesting one to follow because a lot of it will kind of tell us what the 49ers have planned for their current depth, both by who they draft and who they don't draft. If they don't go with a nose tackle early, then they must be comfortable with Ian Williams and or Glenn Dorsey. However, if we see some defensive tackles going in the first 2-3 rounds, maybe then suddenly Ian Williams is looking at more of a depth role. At defensive end, the big issue is finding depth behind Justin Smith and Ray McDonald. Smith and McDonald have been among the league leaders in snaps the last 2 years, and while Vic Fangio may not rotate a lot of guys in, they showed that you can get worn down, and we saw that late last year, leading all the way up through the Super Bowl, where the 49ers need more depth along the defensive line. They need a guy that could eventually surpass, could take over the role from Justin Smith. Right now they've got Dorsey, they've got DeMarcus Dobbs, Tony Gerard-Eddy, and Will Tukuafu. All could prove solid. The problem is we don't really know what the 49ers think of them in terms of potential down-the-road starting roles. DeMarcus Dobbs has excelled in special teams and then has been getting a little bit of time on on the defensive line. But he also missed the playoffs due to an injury, and he'll get his chance in the upcoming training camp to compete for some time. But I think we can expect to see the 49ers draft a defensive lineman in the first 2-3 rounds, a guy that they can develop really as that next big thing for them. The same holds true for safety. The 49ers did sign Craig Dahl. They've got C.J. Spillman, Darcel McBath, Trenton Robinson, a pick last year, and Michael Thomas, who spent the season on the practice squad. Dante Whitner is pretty much locked in at strong safety, but beyond that, the 49ers need to figure out what they're going to do in place of Deshaun Goldson. Again, safety is another position where it's pretty deep in this draft. If the 49ers do not draft a safety in the first 2 days, I would be surprised. They've got 5 picks in the first 3 rounds. They're going to do some trading, but safety is definitely a position of need. I would not be surprised if they traded up in the first round to get a safety, but if they decide that they want to wait a little bit, maybe they go middle second, early third for that safety position. I don't think that the 49ers, they do need some quarterback depth, but I don't think that it is nearly as big an issue as some may believe. I think, again, the 49ers need to find some more depth. That could mean finding an outside linebacker that could rotate in alongside Aldon Smith and Ahmad Brooks. There are no guarantees of that as well because they've got Paris Harrelson signed for another year. They drafted Darius Fleming and Cam Johnson last year. Neither played all that much. Darius Fleming was out the whole year. Cam Johnson played a little bit late in the season. Again, this is another one where if the 49ers don't draft an outside linebacker in the first 3, 4, 5 rounds, that'll tell us kind of what they think of Darius Fleming and Cam Johnson. Harrelson can hold down the fort for another year, but Fleming and Johnson could be those guys that they think can rotate in behind Aldon Smith and Ahmad Brooks. And really that's going to be key this year. The 49ers' biggest problem was lack of depth on defense. They've got a dominant starting defense, but when that unit gets worn down, as we saw in the playoffs, suddenly becomes a struggle. Like I said, we saw Joe Flacco take advantage of it. We saw Matt Ryan take advantage of it. And the 49ers, if they're going to take that next step and become Super Bowl champs, I think the big issue will be firming up that depth. And with 14 draft picks this year, even with trades, they're in a great position to really add a lot of top-of-the-line talent in the draft. So we still got some time before the draft. It's possible the team will sign some free agents, but I really think that really the next big step for this team will come in the draft in late April. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll be back with more, particularly related to the draft, potentially some offensive moves they might make, and we'll see you around. So again, make sure and check youtube.com/SBN Niners Nation.